sorry to do this to you and take away from the episode, but let's just take a quick pause so that I can ask you one question. Where do you need help improving your photography practice? Do you need help crafting better emails? Do you need help telling a better story with your images? I don't know, maybe it's something entirely different. Aaron and I are offering free, one-time only 30-minute one-on-one video sessions to help you with your specific photography and creative goals. We say this all the time on the show. We're not gurus and we're constantly learning ourselves. However, we do have experience and a track record of figuring things out in this industry, and we're confident that we can help you fast track your learning. So if you're benefiting from the general concepts of these episodes, but you want advice and guidance specifically tailored to your unique needs, you can click the link in the episode description to book a one-on-one, one-time 30-minute virtual session entirely for free. Zero cost, you book it at your convenience, and you get 30 minutes of either mine or Aaron's uninterrupted time. You can use the code FREETRIAL, that's FREETRIAL spelled FREETRIAL, at checkout. And now we can get back to today's episode.
Because you're sick. You're a sick boy.
A little cold, but I'm still showing up. Like Jordan Holmes, Game 7.
Mind you, this is the man who says, I don't get sick.
I just said that to someone. I was like,
works in a school, middle schoolers. I don't get sick.
Well, I used to get sick a lot because you work in a school, but then you get all those little immunities, and then you have a robust immune system. But it caught me.
Mm-hmm.
What can you do?
Well, people can hear your voice. They're primed for
it's raspy.
You may be raspy.
Raspy and graspy. Gravelly and graspy.
Yeah, we can picture you maybe holding a warm cup of tea.
Even though you're not. Chamomile.
So, for your sake, we're going to keep it quick today.
Thank you.
Punchy. We'll try not to ramble too much. And we're going to talk today about how introverted creators can do better with their communication in person and digitally. This was a question somebody asked me in a one-on-one session we did. And I said, hey, I can't answer this as well as maybe Aaron can because I'm not naturally an introverted person. It's a spectrum, of course. We're not all the way to one side as individuals, that being extroverted or introverted. And it can move based on situation to situation. But you, I know, at heart are an introverted person, photographer. You do quite well communicating. You're around people for your job. We just said you work in a middle school.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think necessarily that it has to, if you're introverted, it necessarily means that you struggle to be social or to interact. Maybe some. I think it's more so you as an introvert, you recharge on your own and kind of going within.
Yeah.
But I was really excited to, well, first of all, if you want a question of yours talked about more in depth on the show, book one of those one-on-ones. The first 30 minutes, or if you do we're doing free consults for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
First time.
That's a pretty good deal. It's free.
No strings attached. So if you want a question of yours turned into a podcast episode, there's a chance to do that. Link to that is in the episode description. So how can introverted people, creators, do better with communication in person and digitally? I said this to you before we pressed record. And you were like, I know exactly how to tackle this. So do yourself a favor as well.
Mm-hmm.
You say you're always very long-winded. It takes you a long time to get to your answers. Save your voice, man. So
yeah,
I'll try and help out.
Yeah, help me out.
Yeah. All right.
Maybe it's a like a limiter. It'll just keep me concise.
Nice.
Succinct and concise. I keep combining words today. I'm making new words.
Cool.
When you're sick, you invent things. So, but I think it's an interesting topic. I think starting off with the definition of introvert is a person who, is characterized as someone that's reserved or quiet or likes introspective behaviors and enjoys spending time alone. more than being out and bubbly and talking with people and partying and being around people, what have you. So someone that is probably more comfortable. I think that's the key word, is more comfortable in one way of life versus the other. It doesn't mean you can't do the other or act or put on a show, if you will, because sometimes it feels that way. Like I'm putting on a little bit of a show and this doesn't feel natural. I'd rather be quiet. But I think there's a few things to think of. First of all, I don't want it to be an excuse in terms of like labeling what we are. We are an introvert. Well, we might have introverted tendencies. We might have preferences. But I think it's a disservice to say like what exactly we are, which means if we are something, we aren't something else. And I think for me, maybe I'm a mix of both. I think we're all on a spectrum in some level of that, but I might have a preference, but I think there's certain situations where you can set yourself up to do certain things and recharge yourself when you need to, and not put yourselves too far to the extroverted side where you're like, I don't need to be the hit of a party. But this podcast, for example, appears very extroverted. I'm talking to however many people are listening. I'm putting my thoughts out there in public.
Talking to me.
Talking to you, but it's one-on-one. There's a screen protecting us. I'm down in my basement. It's comfortable. It's cool. As soon as we're done, I can go recharge however I need to, read a book, make a cup of tea. That sounded good. Go take a nap, go to bed, whatever it is. So I think putting yourselves in a situation that you can handle and not be overwhelmed with is key to appearing. And that's what we want to do when we're dealing with clients or photography jobs, is like we want to appear that we're able to have a conversation. We want to appear that we can clearly describe our words and our thoughts and what our process is. We want to give all those appearances, but a lot of it might be done behind a phone call, behind a screen, in an email, in a Canva pitch, in a storyboarding, whatever it may be. There's very few times I feel like as a photographer, you have to be like the show, the star of the show. You just have to kind of do your job and be able to communicate. So those are my first thoughts in general in terms of feeling introverted and feeling like you need to be able to be extroverted or communicate or have big discussions with groups of people.
I think it's interesting the part you first touched on about labeling. I am an introvert. I am an extrovert. I am X. And I'm so glad you talked about that because it can naturally create a barrier or a self-limiting belief just simply by labeling, right?
Yeah.
I am an introvert. Therefore, communication, having outgoing moments will automatically be more difficult. You and I talk a lot about how to reframe things on the podcast. And it's just interesting that framing something that way initially right off the bat can trick you or tell you that you are not inclined in this instance to naturally be a good communicator. You may not be, but you also may be.
Yeah, I love the fixed mindset versus growth mindset. And if you're familiar or not familiar, look that up and like refresh on it. It's language, and it really shapes, I think, two kinds of people, like people that keep going and figure it out, or people that stop at that label. So for example, I'm an introvert. Being extroverted is hard. I'm an introvert. I'd rather be on my own, but I'm going to work at being extroverted. I'm going to work at doing certain things so I can become more extroverted or feel more comfortable in that space. That's sort of a growth mindset versus labeling it and putting a period on the end of the sentence and being like, I'm not good at this. I'm not good at this yet. There's a huge difference in terms of the energy even in that language that you're telling yourself and feeding yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, language is like a magic potion. Like, it really is. It really can shape your reality. It can shape your perception. And there's just such a difference than like, I'm not good at that, versus someone saying, I'm not good at that yet, but I'm going to keep trying. Like, such a difference. Right. So I think we all have preferences. Like, I'd rather listen to certain kind of music versus other kind of music, or I'd rather play certain kinds of music than other kind. I'd rather take pictures of certain things versus other things. But if you want to take pictures of other things, you can say, that's not my favorite, but I'm going to work at it because I want that skill set. I think that's a good analogy to say, like, how can I make this as easy as possible? How can I put myself out there enough where I know I can go and retreat? So just a quick example, like you and me every week when we're talking here, like I'm putting out a lot of energy talking and trying to put my thoughts where I'm more on my own. I'm not talking nonstop. I'm kind of quiet and in my own head, introverted. But when I'm done here, I know, like, oh, I can close the laptop and go read or go listen to music or go play guitar or go sleep or whatever it may be. Like, I know this is a section of my day, and I can go do my thing afterwards.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I think what you touched on, I want to go shoot this thing, not necessarily because I wholeheartedly want to. I want to build the skill set, I think is somewhat along the lines of what you said. I think the key to that is, and this is a question I've been asking myself a lot the last week in particular, just consciously throughout the day. I'll be asking myself this is, how can I make this more enjoyable? How can I make doing the dishes more enjoyable? I sure as hell don't want to do them. How can I make writing an email more enjoyable? Even just by 5-10%. I heard it on a podcast. I think the guest was Joe Hudson. I don't know much about him other than that's his name, but I resonated with this because it was a suggestion of his. Is how can we feel more joy in the things that aren't necessarily joyful naturally? So for example, I was driving listening to this and I was like, how can I be more enjoyable right now listening to this podcast in the car? So I reclined my seat a little bit. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm more settled in. I can enjoy what I'm hearing a little bit more.
Yeah.
Or today I was walking Grizzly, and the thought popped in my head. I'm thinking, how can I enjoy this walk just a fraction of a bit better? And this may seem silly, but I came to the conclusion of I'm gonna walk where the sun is. There's shady parts on our walk. I'm gonna walk in the sun and enjoy that warmth on my face and like feel it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it may sound like I'm going on a tangent here, but I think that the concept applies for things that we're not necessarily good at the start, good at yet, as you said, or we feel a bit clunky at, or it's awkward and uncomfortable. The concept of how can I invite and welcome whatever I'm feeling? How can I welcome that awkwardness? How can I welcome this feeling of like I'm in a foreign area and that's uncomfortable? How can I make my setting or the act of what I'm about to do more enjoyable? Can I put some music on? Can I make myself a nice glass of whatever while I write this? I think it's an important question. I feel like it is relevant.
Yeah, I do too. I think what you're saying also, or a parallel to that, is a question of why. So why am I introverted versus extroverted? So certain people are extroverted and would love being at a restaurant or a bar and telling jokes and being, the star of the party, and they leave and they feel energized, like, wow, that was fun. That was great. I could be in that same situation and leave and feel completely drained. This is a little fact about me, but I leave a holiday party, a family party. I have a burst of energy because I'm free. I have a burst of energy in the car going home, and I'm like, my mood is so elevated because I'm like relieved from the stress of whatever that is. And I think the why becomes, well, why am I introverted? And why do I prefer introverted situations more than extroverted? Well, in an extroverted situation, I feel like everyone's looking at me. I feel like everyone's judging me. I feel like my jokes aren't funny or not funny enough, or I'm too tall or too awkward or too, whatever it may be that's going through your head that makes that uncomfortable is the answer. The obstacle is the way. So it's like, I'm going to find those checkpoints and dig into those. Like, yeah, step into your tallness, enjoy it. You don't have to be the funniest in the room. You've got a good sense of humor. Use it when it shines. You don't have to be the star. Just enjoy it. Get to know different people. No one's judging you. They got their own problems. Like, you can walk through those steps and make it easier to be, okay, I have to be extroverted for a couple hours. I can do that because I've kind of went through my barriers and I've knocked them around a bit to be like, you know what? It's not that bad. I can put on this facade. I can put on this act for a little bit. And the more you fake it or put on that facade, the easier it gets. I tell this story often, is like, I play music out at restaurants. The first time it was petrifying. The first 10 times, absolutely petrifying. But you could tell me that we have a gig tomorrow at a new place and I have zero nerves. And that comes with doing it, right? And it comes with like putting yourself in that petrifying situation and getting through it and doing it and doing it and doing it over and over and over until then it's not that bad. It might not be your favorite thing, it might not be what you enjoy more, but it becomes like, oh, I can go do this.
Yeah. Yeah. What you're talking about, and I think people can feel like I need to become someone else to be better at this thing. In this instance, communicating. And I think the goal isn't to become someone else. The goal is to be you, but also to practice and to allow yourself to be in uncomfortable spots for a few minutes or a few moments or a few hours and get through it and build confidence from that is what I feel like you're talking about. Back to the start of our conversation where you were saying, I can appear like I'm a good communicator. I can appear like I'm extroverted for a moment. And I think there can be this weird guilt or shame that comes with that, maybe for some naturally introverted people, because it feels like it's not them and that they're putting on a facade.
Yeah.
But I would say, to get philosophical, what's the difference between appearing and acting and actually being that in that moment? The term fake it till you make it. To what extent are you being the thing?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's always moods like where you got to show up. Sometimes you got to show up and you might not feel like it. Sometimes you might not feel like doing a photo gig, but that's the date on the calendar and that's what you agreed to. And you got to show up.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't, it's going to hurt your business or your bottom line or your income, like whatever it may be, your reputation. Sometimes you have to fake it. Sometimes, your partner tells you a story and you're like, I don't want to listen to this, but you do because you're like supporting them. Like, I think it's important to not always just be like self-centered in the terms of what do I want to do right now? That's what I need to do. I need to just focus on I don't really buy into that too much. I feel like there's a place for that when you're getting taken advantage of, but there's also a place to be like, I need to acclimate and fit in to either be polite or accomplish a goal or get this job or actually have a good time, because the option is like not going to the party, or not networking, or not putting your foot out there for the fear of rejection, whatever it may be. There's a lot of things we can avoid. There's a lot of pain we can avoid in the world, but sometimes pushing through it and coming out the other side does feel good, and does feel like you accomplished something, and does feel like, hey, I faked that a little bit. Like I wasn't really in the mood to do that or to schmooze, but I schmoozed pretty well and I got a gig out of it. So maybe that was worth it. Maybe it was worth, coming out of my comfort zone to try something else, especially in a business where communication is paramount.
Yeah. Yeah. And just back to the concept of fake it till you make it, or feeling, I guess this ties in a little bit into being an imposter, right? So, for example, like, see, I just did it there, what I was about to say. I'm trying my best every episode. I don't use many to begin with, but avoiding filler words like, and I listen to a lot of podcasts. I watch a lot of YouTube, and I look at people and I say, wow, they are so good at speaking and articulating their thoughts. Well, I feel like I have a decent grasp on that, but I feel like I'm nowhere near where some of these people I look up to are. And I'm not comparing. It just sometimes will make me think, when I get on a podcast with you, I feel like I'm faking it sometimes in terms of articulating and trying to convey thoughts smoothly. But at the same time, I'm doing the thing weekly. So even though I may feel not as, I don't want to say talented, but as skilled at this stage as some of the people I look up to, the art of doing is still the most important part, and will continue to not accelerate, but continue to allow me to grow said skill of speaking better. And even now, I'm thinking in my head, trying not to use these words. It's like a very involved process, and conscious and deliberate. And that could be the same for, I feel, someone who's trying to get better at writing emails, who's trying to get better at formulating the proper response, either verbally or digitally, to someone, a client, another, or a model on a shoot that they're working with or hoping to.
Yeah. And I do think there is a balance between, that formulating this perfect version of who you think yourself is, and being true to who you are, and your natural little tendencies and idiosyncrasies and jokes and punctuation and whatever it may be in an email. Otherwise we can just AI it, chat GPT, every little thing. But there is something about personality and letting that shine through, and not being too critical of, I need to approach the threshold of the people that I look up on, or I'm not going to be taken seriously. I think our tendencies to be who we are and portray our personalities and our quirks does help sometimes to sell and stand out. So when you are who you are and you get picked for a job or picked for anything, it feels really good. There is a bit of self-doubt if you truly try really hard to be someone else and then get picked for a job. Then there's a pressure to, now I have to be that person the entire time that I'm on this job.
Right.
And there's a balance between the two. There really is. I think I just slaved over an email with a company, and like trying to pitch myself after a good quick phone call. So it went well. So it was a secondary email following up. And I was like, is this too much? Is this too little? Well, how much do they want to see? What do they need to see? How many details do I need to give? Like it just kept going back and forth, trying to produce
good questions, though, to help you optimize for the proper outcome. Yeah. But it can be daunting for sure. And I can see what you're saying. You want to make sure you say and hit all the right points and get it perfect while also remaining you.
Pressing send was difficult. Those were those ones that are like, gah, okay. And it worked out, but it's those are those moments where it doesn't come necessarily perfectly naturally, and you have to like, what would the best version of myself do? Like, what do I want to portray here? I'm just going to kind of try to portray that, and what happens, and kind of going through it
right
in that sense, and giving it your best. But 100% trying to put yourself in those situations more and more will help that labeling. And you'll start to hear yourself be like, I'm an introvert, extrovert. It depends on the situation. You'll start to change the label as you get more confident in the skill.
Yeah. So maybe we've really done the macro and we've hit some conceptual topics. Speaking to more nuanced things, what are some really important things you include in emails or make sure you're doing to showcase that you are an assertive communicator, either in person or digitally, or both? I know we're trying to spare your voice.
No,
I'll weigh in after you because I have some unique things I like to implement always.
I think I fix this often. I fix a tone of, as the introvert on the show, I might have a tone of like uncertainty. I might have a tone of like, hey, if it's good for you, or let me know if you got this email. Like, kind of, I don't want to offend. I don't want to lose the job by being too pushy or saying something. In the last couple of years, I've tried to really back off of this and be very transparent and very straightforward with what I'm trying to say and not tiptoeing.
Mm-hmm.
I just CC'd you on an email with a guest we're trying to get on, and it was like right to the point.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't any like, hey, I know you're busy, I'm sorry to interrupt. Like, none of that tone. And that's some of the tone that I used to be able, or used to have, because the introvert part of me would be like I don't like conflict. I'd rather be in my own self. I don't want to reach out to these people. I don't want to ruffle feathers.
It shifts the power dynamic too, right?
Yeah.
Which is important. I think people might feel uncomfortable hearing that, but there's a balance in a conversation. It's not a struggle for power. I understand that, but there's kind of a who's in charge here. Are we both in charge? Is this my idea and I'm supposed to kind of run with the ball?
Right.
There is that feeling, and finding the balance in those conversations or emails is important, because in your instance where you used to say, I know you're busy, but it vocalizes or demonstrates that the party you're emailing has all the value. It can give that impression, whereas even though maybe you started the conversation, you have a ton of value to offer them, which is hard to remember, even especially if you're new or just starting out or an intermediate.
Yeah, and I think conveying that you're a professional, if you are, is important. And it's without saying it, but it's like, hey, I don't have time for this shit. Let's figure this out. It's yes or no. Like, I need to move on. I need to schedule my calendar. Like, I need to go. Like, I don't have time to play these games. We're not doing this anymore. And I think that makes people go like, yes or no. Like, well, sorry. Oh, fine. Good. Bye. Like, I'm not playing this back and forth forever.
You're also copying, pasting, though. There's a touch of personality to your straightforwardness, I think, is what you're getting at too. And I like that idea of, in the beginning, asking those low cost questions, yes, no's, when you don't have that level of a rapport, because I feel like it serves both parties if If it's an immediate no, you can move on. And asking a question that's yes or no has a low time cost for the other person. I think we talked about that in the episode with Nash Hagen.
Yep.
He always recommends your goal in an email is just to get them to respond, because from there is where you can build rapport and a relationship, and you can get them invested in what you're trying to do. I know, of course, we're talking right now about making income with this, but I feel like this sort of applies across the board if you're trying to start a relationship or conversation in any sense. If you can make a response simple, you can build from there. And yes or no questions are great to do that.
Yeah. Are you interested in hearing more?
My only
Yes or no?
options are yes, no, or to not reply, which is also no.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think another important part, just back to that balance of, I guess, control or dynamic in a conversation is, and this is something I have learned and implemented and naturally have to on the podcast as a host, is that whoever is asking the questions is steering the conversation, which is really important. I think asking the questions in an email format, you first of all, you steer the conversation where you would like it to go. In other words, your ideal outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And second, it shows assertiveness. It shows confidence, even though it may feel like asking questions makes you seem incompetent. That's not the case. Asking questions, I feel like, does the opposite. Because if you're writing an email and saying like, "Hey, when would you like to meet? Like, when's perfect for you?"
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, I feel like it doesn't really show as much confidence. But in terms of like asking, whoever is asking the questions is really just guiding the conversation. I think that's an important thing just to remember.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that puts you in a more comfortable situation too, as an introvert, sort of taking control. If you take control or guide the conversation, feels a little bit safer than people coming at you, potentially. So that's something to think of. I don't think you want to be overwhelming. I think you want to get the vital information, see if you're moving forward, and going with that.
Yeah. And like, are you free for a call? Here's my availability. I'd like to set something up, just opposed to, hey, like, I'm free all the time. Like, when can you meet? Like, there's different, I think what I was getting at before, which I didn't really phrase well, was there's ways to confidently ask questions as well.
Yeah. I think a nice thing about this profession, photography, is you get to be behind a lens. Even if you're at a wedding, that's a very social event, you have a protection. You're the photographer, you're behind a lens, you're doing a job. We don't need to interact too much. It's the same with playing out at restaurants. Like, people are like, you're so extroverted. No, I'm not. I'm actually on stage, like behind a barrier, like playing music.
Right.
And people are away from me. Like, I'm in a corner. You do a podcast, you're so extroverted. I'm talking to Seth, and we just happen to be recording it and then sharing it. Like, there's these certain ways in jobs where you can appear very extroverted, but you feel protected, you feel safe. And I feel like photography is one of those things where it's like, I could be at a party, but my job is to take pictures, and I'm safe behind the lens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel you. Well, this was fun. I want to save your voice. I don't want you to have
Thank you.
laryngitis.
No, you
talk a lot more than you thought you would.
Yeah. I'm going to go drink some water and hot tea.
Well, hopefully this quick conversation was helpful for some people, even just seeing a new perspective or trying out working on some new skills in terms of how to be a better communicator in person, digitally. And
definitely.
faking it till you make it isn't maybe faking it at all. Maybe it's the act. Maybe that is being.
It's practicing.
Maybe you are being the thing.
Trying something new is really what you're doing.
And you're not trying to become somebody else. I think you're trying to allow the natural you to step out of that window of what is comfortable.
Yep.
So it's always a pleasure talking to you, man. If you like what you hear, listeners, feel free to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It's a cost-free, effective way to support both of us. And you can watch these episodes on YouTube. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Link to that's in the episode description. And again, if you want to do a one-on-one with Aaron and I for 30 minutes, first time, entirely free.
Entirely free.
Entirely free.
What a deal.
Link to that's in the episode description. And with that, we'll see you next time.
Take care.